Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Straw 2025, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There's a distinct kind of silence that settles over the screen in the opening seconds. Not the silence of calm or serenity, but the sort that breathes heavily with tension. An overcast sky. A field scorched not by fire, but by absence. And then, a solitary figure moving through the frame. Barely a silhouette, barely a person at all. Just the suggestion of someone who's endured too much. From this quiet unease, something begins to unfold that doesn't just want your attention. It demands your reckoning. In a year overwhelmed by loud spectacle and pixel-perfect illusions, this film offers something unnerving in its restraint. It speaks in the language of suppressed dread, of things left unsaid, of quiet that cuts deeper than screams ever could. It is at once a psychological thriller, a post-crisis drama, and a near-future fable that hits far too close to home. Here, the world hasn't ended, but it's certainly forgotten how to breathe. The story places us in the brittle aftermath of what officials called the drought. Not a meteorological event, though water did disappear in places. Not a war, though battles were fought. This was a drought of empathy, a crisis of consequence. Over the years, the slow corrosion of truth and trust brought society to its knees not with a bang, but with a shrug. And in the space left behind, something else took root. Something colder, something calculating. Our entry point is Alice Rourke, a former policy analyst whose job once revolved around predicting societal collapse scenarios, until those scenarios arrived in headlines rather than models. Her face is the first we truly see, worn by regret and sun-creased from exposure. She's returned to her childhood town, a rural edge of nowhere barely clinging to the illusion of community. Power is intermittent, stores are shuttered, and most conversations happen behind closed doors. The digital networks that once kept people connected have gone eerily quiet, and the few who remain now watch each other with eyes wide open but mouths sewn shut. Alice isn't just here for nostalgia. She's looking for someone, or perhaps something. Years earlier, her younger brother vanished. Officially labeled as another disappearance during the resource adjustments, his case was folded into the pile of unanswered mysteries. But Alice has never believed he simply walked away. There were patterns, news fragments, cryptic footage, and more than one whispered rumor that led her back to this place. And now that she's here, it's clear the town hasn't forgotten what happened. It's just collectively decided not to speak of it. What starts as a simple investigation soon spirals into something much darker. Each thread Alice pulls unravels a layer of history soaked in denial. Old neighbors look through her, as if staring too long might invite her questions into their lives. The sheriff, an affable man named Kane with a perpetual squint and a clean record, seems too quick to help and too slow to reveal anything real. Even the landscape seems to resist her. Power lines that crackle and die whenever she's near, storm drains whispering in the wind, and children who draw symbols in dirt they shouldn't understand. What unfolds is a slow, surgical peeling back of illusions. The town, it turns out, participated in something it can't quite admit. A test, maybe. A program. No one calls it by name, but the scars are everywhere. School buildings converted into processing centers, a hospital wing sealed off without explanation, and in the woods, a barn that wasn't there the year before. The farther Alice pushes, the more she's forced to confront not just the town's guilt, but her own. In a stunning midpoint revelation, we learn the truth. The resource adjustments were never about preserving balance. They were experiments in obedience, rolled out under the guise of emergency protocols. Volunteers were asked to participate. Those who refused simply disappeared. Her brother wasn't taken because he was weak. He was one of the first to say no. But even this isn't the deepest cut. The final act rewires everything. Throughout her investigation, Alice has been receiving strange messages, clippings, coordinates, and voice notes from an unknown source. The twist? They're from herself. Or rather, versions of herself. This is where the film veers into speculative territory, but not in the way of time travel or alternate dimensions. Instead, it reveals that during the height of the program, a neurosplit protocol was tested, an initiative designed to fragment identities, separating conscience from compliance. Alice had been part of the early phases. Her memories were redacted. Her guilt sterilized. Every lead she's followed, every clue dropped in her path, was orchestrated by her unedited self, buried deep within the architecture of her own mind. The barn. A convergence point. A memory chamber. And when she finally enters it, the film's quiet tension explodes into hallucinatory intensity. Inside, the walls breathe. Footage plays of things that never happened, or things she forgot. She sees her brother, not older or younger, but changed. Part of the resistance, part of the experiment. It's unclear. The film doesn't offer clarity, only confrontation. She meets herself, not in a mirror, but standing there, waiting. And the exchange is brutal. "You asked to forget," her echo says. "I asked to survive," she replies. And with that, the barn begins to collapse, not physically, but metaphorically. The mind unspooling. The illusion shattering. The ending is deliberately ambiguous. Alice stumbles out of the barn, not triumphant but exposed. The town watches. Someone claps. A slow, single clap. It's not applause. It's acknowledgement. She walks toward the horizon as the screen fades to white, not black, but white, as if daring the audience to imagine what comes next. There are no heroes here. No grand rescue. Just the haunting truth that complicity often wears the face of good intentions. That forgetting can be a survival mechanism, but remembering is what makes us human. What makes this film truly exceptional isn't its dystopian trappings or psychological unraveling. It's the atmosphere it cultivates, the oppressive quietude, the brittle sense of danger hiding in everyday places, the way characters speak like they're censoring every sentence in real time. Every frame is composed like a confession. Every scene feels like it's watching you back. And perhaps that's the most terrifying thing. It doesn't just want you to watch. It wants you to see yourself. Not just in Alice, but in the people who looked away, who played along, who told themselves it wasn't their responsibility. It's not about the future. It's about the present we're pretending not to notice. By the time the credits roll, you're not quite sure what was real and what was manipulated. But you know this. Something has shifted. The silence has meaning now. The field is still empty, but not forgotten. And somewhere, buried beneath it all, is the question we're too afraid to ask. If you had the chance to forget your role in something terrible, would you take it? Or would you fight to remember, even if it cost you everything? That's the story, friends. One that lingers long after the screen fades and the sound cuts out. One that invites us, however uncomfortably, to listen more closely to the silences we carry. It begins with the sound of dry grass scraping against itself, the wind whispering through stalks that should have been harvested seasons ago. There's no music, no title card, just the world, brittle and tired. In the distance, the shape of a car creeps along a dirt road that seems to stretch endlessly in either direction. Dust trails behind like smoke. And inside that car, Alice Rourke drives without a destination, or perhaps toward one she hasn't fully admitted to herself yet. She hasn't been here in nearly 2 decades. The town, her hometown, is still marked on maps, but barely. The signs leading in are sun-faded, half-swallowed by overgrowth. The gas station where she used to buy cherry slushes as a kid is boarded up, its pumps rusted like artifacts. The main road looks like it's holding its breath, lined with buildings that remember too much. The only signs of life are slow-moving, cautious. People don't stroll anymore. They skulk. They glance over shoulders. They speak softly or not at all. Alice parks outside what used to be her family's home. It's still there, though different. The roof has been patched with mismatched materials. A window is missing glass, replaced by wood. No one answers when she knocks, and the key under the third stone on the left still works. Inside, it's clear someone's been maintaining the place. Dust is minimal, furniture orderly. Photographs remain on the walls. Her mother's stern face, her father's rare smile, her brother Danny, always in motion, blurry in every picture as though he never really wanted to be caught. That night, she dreams of running through cornfields. The sky is dark, but not starless, just hazy. She's calling out, but her voice doesn't echo. Something is chasing her. Or maybe leading her. It's unclear. The next morning, she finds an envelope on the front porch. No stamp, no name. Inside, a single photograph of the barn at the edge of town, the one that never used to be there. It's dated 4 days ago. Alice visits the sheriff under the pretense of updating her status as a returning resident. Kane is friendly enough, smiles in a way that makes her feel like a child again, though he asks too many questions and answers too few. He tells her the barn belongs to the Haskells now, an old family. Private property. Not really worth her curiosity. She thanks him, notes the twitch in his jaw when she says she's looking into Danny's disappearance. The word disappearance makes his fingers drum on the desk. At the local library, now only open a few hours a week, Alice begins combing through town records. She pretends she's researching migration patterns, drought-era relocation statistics. The librarian doesn't seem to care. She finds nothing conclusive about Danny. His file ends abruptly, with a form marked Archived, redundant entry. The date on the form is the same one he vanished. When she returns to the house, her front door is ajar. Nothing's been taken, but the photograph is gone. She starts documenting everything on paper. Not digitally. Her devices glitch every time she's near the barn or uses certain keywords. Handwriting is safer. The pattern begins to take shape in ink and instinct. Every person she interviews either denies remembering Danny or offers vague, unsettling platitudes. He was a good boy. Left at the right time. Some people just know when to go. It's at the grocery store, the only functioning one left, that she meets Ruth, a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Ruth recognizes her instantly and doesn't pretend otherwise. She remembers Danny. She remembers the day he vanished. But she won't speak of it unless Alice walks her home. On the walk, Ruth explains something that sounds half-mad. That during the height of the shortages, the town entered into something called the Accord. A way to maintain control, to balance need and supply. Families with more than 2 children were offered incentives to voluntarily contribute to redistribution. No one really talked about what that meant, and when people started saying no, they stopped showing up at school, or at work, or anywhere. The town called it harmonizing. Danny had been outspoken, even as a teenager. He wrote letters, filed complaints, tried to organize students. One day, he went to the Haskell barn, and that was the last anyone saw of him. Alice goes to the barn the following day, just before dusk. It's enormous, more modern than the rest of the area. Metal siding, secured doors, small surveillance nodes tucked in the eaves. She walks its perimeter. No windows. No sound from within. But as she stands there, her phone lights up in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. This is not the beginning. This is your return. Later that night, Alice finds a journal in the attic of her house. Not hers. Danny's. The last entry is chaotic, fragmented. They promised clarity. But I see double now. Myself and something else. I think they're making copies. She stares at that line for what feels like an hour. The next sequence of days blur together. She interviews former teachers, gets stonewalled by town council members, and finds 3 more photographs under her door, each one older than the last. One shows the barn under construction. Another shows a group of kids standing outside it, Danny among them. The third shows her. A version of her, anyway. She's older than in any photo she remembers, standing near the barn, holding a clipboard. Smiling. She visits Ruth again. But this time, Ruth is gone. Her house, cleared out. No forwarding address. The neighbors say she moved on. Alice doesn't buy it. One morning, she finds the barn's side door unlocked. Inside, it's clinical. Rows of filing cabinets. White boards. Metal chairs. In the center of the room, a strange contraption. Wires, a chair, a dome-like structure above it. Monitors flicker dimly, as though half awake. She takes photos, records everything. Then a voice speaks behind her. Flat. Familiar. You were never meant to see this again. It's her voice. But not hers. A woman stands there, nearly identical. But colder. More precise in posture and tone. She tells Alice the truth in fractured sentences. That the mind is not indivisible. That during the height of the Accord, a process was developed, externalized conscience separation. Volunteers would be split, one part assuming full responsibility for decision-making, the other free of burden. She was part of it. She volunteered. What was left behind became a tool for enforcement. The good self moved on. The other remembered everything. Alice flees. But not before the other version tells her. Your brother tried to save you. You traded him instead. She drives without knowing where. Ends up at the lake, dry and cracked. She screams into the emptiness until her throat bleeds. She doesn't remember trading Danny. You traded him instead. She drives without knowing where. Ends up at the lake, dry and cracked. She screams into the emptiness until her throat bleeds. She doesn't remember trading Danny. She doesn't remember volunteering. But she can't shake the sense that it's true. She looks through old notebooks, files, and at the journal again. New lines have appeared. As if written recently. You'll come back. You always do. And maybe this time, you'll choose differently. That night, she dreams again. She's in the barn. Wires on her head. Danny is across from her, eyes glassy, mouth open like he's about to say something. But the words never come. She wakes up with dirt under her fingernails and a new photograph beside her pillow. It shows the barn on fire. But there's no record of any fire. The barn still stands. Untouched. The final scene before it all begins to change shows Alice walking back toward the structure, no longer afraid, not sure of what she'll find, but knowing now that the past she's been chasing may be something she built herself. She stands at the threshold again, watching the barn as if it might blink. The morning light flattens everything, washing color from the landscape until all that remains is a study in gray and bone. It's colder today, though the air carries no chill. Just a quiet that feels sharper than before. The kind of quiet that knows what's coming. She doesn't knock. There's no point. The door that was once locked is wide open now, swaying gently like it's beckoning her back in. Inside, the layout has changed. The sterile interior she first stepped into is gone. In its place is something more familiar, more intimate. There are photos pinned to the walls. Her own handwriting on a whiteboard. Drawings from Danny's journals, sketched in charcoal and panic. A video monitor plays on loop in the background, flickering with distorted clips. Alice, younger, pacing. Danny tied to a chair, eyes glazed. A voiceover muttering protocol numbers she doesn't remember authorizing. The machine in the center has been activated. Lights blink softly on its dome, casting pale blue reflections against the steel floor. It hums like a heart unsure of its rhythm. She steps closer and sees the other version of herself already sitting in the chair. Not restrained. Waiting. "I knew you'd come," the echo says, her tone devoid of malice or welcome. Alice doesn't ask how she got here. Some things are no longer worth questioning. "You said I chose this," she replies. "You did," the echo says, turning slowly. "Not to be cruel, but to forget. You were breaking. We all were." Alice's breath catches. Something she couldn't admit before begins to settle behind her ribs. The version in the chair tilts her head. "You made me the vault, the keeper. Everything you couldn't live with, you gave to me." Alice circles the machine, eyes scanning for a manual, a switch, anything tangible to tether herself to reality. "What happened to Danny?" she whispers. The other Alice answers, and this time the words come like broken glass. "He tried to extract me." Alice goes still. "He thought if he could reverse the protocol, merge us again, you'd remember. We could stop the program before it spread. And they stopped him first." There's no dramatics in the delivery. Just fact. Like a ledger entry, marked and filed. He didn't just vanish, Alice. He was offered. As proof. You needed assurance the vault would hold. They gave you your brother as collateral. Alice feels the walls tilt. Liar. But the denial lacks fire. The other Alice looks away, her voice smaller now. "Why would I lie? I'm the part of you that remembers. I don't need to lie." She takes a step forward. Her image flickers. "You came here thinking you were hunting answers. But this whole thing, this town, this return, it's a loop. They've been sending you back every few years. Testing reintegration. Seeing if guilt would trigger restoration. But it never sticks. You always run." The room begins to tremble. Not physically, but cognitively. As if her very perception is fraying at the seams. Time sloshes. Faces blur. She remembers being 12 and hearing Danny say, "You always pretend you don't know the rules, but you wrote them." Alice drops to her knees. "What do I do?" she chokes. The vault version of her smiles gently, an expression that's not cruel, not kind, just human. "You listen. For once. You don't try to fix it. You just let yourself feel it. There's a switch beneath the console. A fail-safe. Not a reset. A merger." Alice presses it without knowing if it's the right decision. The room goes dark. And when the lights come back, she is alone. Her head pounds. Her limbs feel detached. But something is different. Her thoughts aren't hers anymore. Not hers alone. They're crowded. Chaotic. Truths she had buried flood forward in brutal clarity. She remembers the contract. The signature in blood, not ink. The machine pulsing around her while she sat in that same chair, nodding as her handler explained, temporary division. She remembers Danny screaming, not out of fear, but frustration. Pleading with her to walk away. That they could survive without compromise. She remembers telling him, "Survival isn't clean." She remembers the barn's first fire. The real one. She started it. To erase the trial data. But they rebuilt it. Perfectly. Like it had never burned. They always had a backup. Alice staggers out into the light, blinking furiously as memory rearranges reality. The town isn't how she remembered it because it never was. Half of it's a construct, fabricated to ease reintegration. She passes by a man she spoke with days earlier, but his face is new. Rendered, not born. She drives again, this time not to escape, but to confront. She heads to the council building, now clearer to her as a command node. There are people inside, or versions of people, waiting for her arrival. They expected her. Always did. "You're early," one of them says. A woman in a gray coat, eyes that flash like screens. The cycle isn't complete. I ended the cycle, Alice says. The woman smiles sadly. No one ends the cycle. You just start a new one. Alice pulls a drive from her coat. The only copy of Danny's journal, merged now with her own. Proof not of what they did, but of what she allowed. She places it on the table. Broadcast it, she says. The woman hesitates. Alice leans forward. You think people won't believe? You've trained them not to. But belief isn't what matters. Doubt is. All I need is doubt. That night, the signal goes live. Images flash across every still active node in the region. Snippets of her memory. Danny's final speech. Logs. Contracts. Footage from the vault. Names. Faces. Consequences. And then the feed goes black. Not everyone believes. But enough do. In the weeks that follow, the town changes. Slowly. People begin to speak again. Quietly, but honestly. Ruth returns, though older, less lucid. She tells Alice she never left. She was just waiting in one of the adjacent states, whatever that means. Time bends, even in healing. Alice rebuilds her house, not as it was, but as she needs it to be now. Sparse. Honest. No locks. The barn remains. A ruin now. Unwatched. She visits it sometimes. Not out of guilt, but acknowledgement. There's no great revolution. No uprising. But conversations begin. People remember what silence cost them. And that's how change begins. Not with fire, but with a whisper carried just loud enough to be heard. In the final scene, Alice walks through the field again. Same wind as before, same scrape of straw against the sky. But this time, she's not alone. A child walks beside her, quiet, alert, maybe imagined, maybe not. They don't speak. They don't need to. She looks up at the sky. It's still overcast. But light is breaking through. Alice Rourke is not a hero in the traditional sense. She doesn't move through the story with a cape of certainty or the armor of righteousness. Instead, she is made of softer, more dangerous things. Grief that calcified into logic, loyalty sharpened into obsession, memory curled around denial like a vine choking the truth beneath it. What makes her so compelling isn't what she does, but what she refuses to admit she has already done. From the moment she returns to her hometown, Alice moves like someone both retracing and resisting the path she once carved. Her eyes search every surface as if a single misplaced item might undo the tight control she has forced upon herself. She is composed, clinical. Her background in systems analysis makes her question everything she sees. But beneath that exterior is someone barely holding herself together. We see it in the way her hands linger on photographs. In the hesitation before each question she asks. In the way she never says her brother's name out loud until well past the halfway mark. There is a fracture inside her that hums like static. And the deeper she goes into the investigation, the louder that fracture becomes. She's not just looking for answers. She's trying to validate a version of herself that's slipping further and further from the truth. Each clue she uncovers doesn't just threaten the town. It threatens her entire understanding of who she's been. The story is cruel in how it reveals that Alice was once both participant and architect. She wasn't forced into complicity, she volunteered. Not out of malice, but a deep, blinding desperation to protect her mind from the enormity of what she sanctioned. And that is where the horror truly lives. In the knowledge that good intentions can be leveraged into monstrous acts, so long as you carve out the part of yourself that remembers. And so she did. Alice created a vault, not just metaphorically, but literally. A version of herself to bear the memory, to store the cost. And in doing so, she split in two. One version moved on, built a career, buried the past. The other, left behind, became the guardian of everything unspoken. It is this shadow self that ultimately drives the story's unraveling, and it is her presence that gives Alice dimension far beyond the typical protagonist. The vault isn't evil. She isn't resentful. She is simply full, brimming with the weight Alice offloaded. She speaks not with fury, but with the calm authority of someone who has watched another version of herself fail to face the truth again and again. Every return to the town is just another rotation in a cycle designed to test whether Alice is ready to be whole again. And every time, until now, she ran. What's fascinating is how little distinction exists between the two versions once you remove context. Their faces are the same, their voices nearly identical. But it's in the subtle things, the way they carry silence, the way they measure their words, where we feel the chasm. One is fragmented by what she doesn't remember. The other is shattered by everything she can't forget. Danny Rourke, though absent for most of the film, is never far from its emotional core. He haunts the story like a breeze through the fields, felt even when unseen. And when we do glimpse him, it's almost never in full. A shoulder in a photo. A voice on a tape. A scribbled note in a journal. He is constructed through memory and loss, pieced together not as a character but as a question. What does it cost to be the one who remembers when everyone else has chosen to forget? Danny's resistance isn't grand. He doesn't storm buildings or broadcast manifestos. He tries to do the quiet, hard thing, talk to people, write letters, pull threads. His disappearance isn't a punishment, it's a sacrifice, twisted into a transaction. The most devastating revelation is that Alice allowed it. Not in rage, not even in fear, but in calculation. One life for the illusion of stability. It's not a decision she even remembers making. That's the point. Danny is what keeps Alice tethered. He is the unfinished sentence in her mind. The glitch in the simulation. Without him, she might never have returned. And when she finally sees him in the vault, barely conscious, more symbol than person, there is no victory. No reunion. Just the unbearable weight of delayed grief. The townspeople are more than backdrop. They are collaborators, prisoners, echoes. Each of them represents a different response to collective guilt. Some, like Sheriff Kane, survive by layering charm over complicity, acting helpful while steering Alice away from danger. His every smile is a distraction. He's not malevolent, but he's practiced in selective amnesia. A man who chose the path of least resistance long ago and now has no idea how to veer off it. Others, like Ruth, carry the truth like a wound. She remembers, but memory has aged her like radiation. She knows what happened, but knowing hasn't made her powerful, it's made her tired. Her help comes not out of defiance, but obligation. She has no illusions about justice. She just wants to tell the story before it fades. Then there are the fabricated figures, people designed, rendered, or manipulated into existing for the sake of maintaining the loop. These characters complicate what we define as real. A man Alice meets twice, but whose face shifts ever so slightly. A woman who gives her directions, only to later claim they never spoke. These people serve the machine, the experiment, the endless testing of Alice's psyche. And in this, they become tragic too. Whether or not they were ever real, they suffer the consequences of a story endlessly replayed. But perhaps the most chilling character of all is the machine itself, the protocol, the program, the system that allowed all this to happen. It doesn't speak. It doesn't move. But it's everywhere. In the way the barn repairs itself. In the static that creeps into Alice's recordings. In the phone calls that drop mid-sentence. The machine is not sentient. It's worse. It's obedient. It carries out its tasks without conscience, because conscience was outsourced, packaged, compartmentalized, and discarded. In this landscape, even memory becomes a character. Fluid, elusive, weaponized. What Alice remembers, and when, determines the course of her journey. And once the merge begins, once she fuses with her other self, the story doesn't shift tone, but shape. Her personality destabilizes, becoming both sharper and more vulnerable. The climax doesn't rely on spectacle. There is no last-minute showdown, no triumphant monologue. It comes when Alice stops running. When she sits with the truth and chooses to act, not to destroy, but to reveal. That simple choice, pressing the failsafe, merging her memories, broadcasting the data, becomes more powerful than any explosion. It is a rejection of silence. A choice to hold the weight of everything, rather than scatter it across versions of herself. And through that choice, Alice transforms. She is no longer the fragmented analyst trying to decode the past. She is the memory, the witness, the one who chose to remember, no matter how unbearable. In the end, she is both guilty and redeemed. Not because she fixed what happened, she didn't. But because she stopped pretending she didn't play a part in it. She claimed her actions, her failures, and the version of herself she once disowned. There is no redemption arc here in the traditional sense. No clean resolution. Just a character who begins as a question and ends as an answer. Flawed, fractured, and finally, honest. That's what lingers long after the film fades. Not just the plot or the twists, but the feeling that we've watched someone claw their way back to themselves. Not as they once were, but as they truly are. Not saved. Not punished. Seen. They say there's something strange about the way silence works in certain films, that it lingers longer, pulses louder, almost like a second character breathing in the frame. With this movie, that silence wasn't just part of the atmosphere. It was born into the production itself. From its earliest moments, before a single frame had been shot, the film carried an energy that many of the cast and crew couldn't quite explain. Not haunted, exactly. But haunted just enough. The director, Lila Evers, is known for her stillness. She speaks little on set, and when she does, her words are clipped, exacting, never wasted. She'd been sitting with this story for nearly 10 years before anyone even knew it existed. And in that decade, the script changed hands exactly 0 times. No rewrites. No studio notes. Not even her producers were allowed to see the final third of the script until filming began. When asked why, she simply said, "You can't direct what you already know how to escape." The barn, the centerpiece of the film, emotionally and symbolically, was built in absolute silence. Literally. The construction crew signed NDAs not just about the design, but about the environment. Cell phones were banned. No power tools were allowed within a 50-foot radius after sundown. Lila claimed she wanted the wood to breathe overnight. That it would sound different on camera if it had been disturbed by metal. Stranger still, the barn was never lit with artificial light, even during night shoots. Every scene inside it was filmed using custom lenses built to capture low-light grain, paired with reflective techniques borrowed from old espionage equipment. The result is that the barn feels alive on camera. It shimmers just slightly. Nothing in post. It's all baked into the footage. The actress who played Alice, Mara Lynn, wasn't the first choice. She wasn't even on the list. Lila cast her after a chance encounter at an audio installation in Iceland. Mara had never acted in a film before. Her background was in vocal performance and grief therapy. Lila said that was perfect. "I don't need someone to perform Alice," she told producers. "I need someone who's already cracked." Mara never once read the script in its entirety. She was given daily pages, often handwritten, slipped under her hotel room door each night. Some days she received no pages at all. The days with no pages were shoot days. She wasn't told who her character was until the final week of filming. This method birthed an extraordinary kind of performance. Raw, disoriented, always searching. When you watch Mara in the early scenes, those moments of hesitation, of grasping, those aren't character choices. They're real. She's trying to make sense of what's happening to her, just as the character is. The scene in the barn, where Alice confronts her double. That was shot in a single take, with no rehearsal. Lila had kept Mara and her body double apart for the entire shoot. 2 separate sets, no crossover, no eye contact. The first time Mara saw her own reflection in the flesh, it was rolling. That stunned look, that hesitation, it wasn't acting. She was seeing herself, her posture, her stillness, her pain, mirrored back at her in real time. The voice of the echo, her split self, wasn't dubbed. It was Mara speaking in sync, live, recorded using directional dual-lapel mics layered over each other at slightly misaligned frequencies. It gives the voice that haunting, almost wet echo effect, as if the words are crawling over each other to escape. And then there's the matter of the photographs. Those stills that appear throughout the movie. Old family photos, newspaper clippings, surveillance shots, weren't props. They were developed from actual 35mm film taken by a second unit that filmed a parallel version of the movie using different actors. This B version was never meant to be shown. It was a ghost film, running silently alongside the primary production. Scenes from this phantom version were dropped into the main movie without explanation, like the photo of the older Alice smiling by the barn. That's not Mara. That's the B version actress. No one acknowledged it. It was never mentioned in marketing. But it's there, like a whisper. Even stranger, some of the B-roll made its way into audience dreams. After the film's premiere at a closed-door screening in Amsterdam, a small group of viewers reported having eerily similar dreams over the next few nights. Each of them described being in a field that wasn't theirs. Each of them heard a voice calling their name, but not their given name. A name they didn't remember having. Word of this phenomenon spread quickly online, under the hashtag #StrawSleeper. Most assumed it was a viral stunt. But the production team swore they never planted it. The sound design team, led by A.O. Tund, operated under a self-imposed rule. No sound could be created in post unless it was derived from something natural recorded on set. The hum in the barn? A slowed-down B-wing beat. The static before a memory glitch? A kettle whistle recorded through a cardboard tube underwater. The eerie click that precedes Alice's dreams? It's Mara's own jaw cracking, recorded at close range and looped. When it came to editing, they used a non-linear system based on feedback from biometric data. During test screenings, viewers were fitted with heart rate monitors and eye tracking sensors. The data from their physiological responses was fed into a custom algorithm that determined the cut order of scenes, not chronologically, but emotionally. The goal was to build a structure that mimicked memory, not logic. No 2 versions of the film are exactly alike. The version you saw may not be the version your friend saw. Mara reportedly requested to watch the film alone, in a private theater. Halfway through, she walked out. Not in protest, but in silence. She said later that she felt as though someone had performed her back at herself. She hasn't watched it since. One of the more unsettling rumors from the set involves the crew staying in a series of cottages near the filming location. Each room had a locked drawer in the nightstand. No one could open them, not even with hotel keys. Critics have dissected these moments with fervor. Some view them as metaphors for generational guilt, how communities forget atrocities not by accident, but by architecture. Others suggest a psychological lens, the town as an externalized mind, each inhabitant a suppressed fragment of Alice's psyche, resisting reintegration. But then there's the barn. The barn is the film's emotional event horizon. It doesn't just house secrets, it absorbs them. When Alice steps inside for the first time, the film undergoes a subtle transformation. The color palette desaturates. The sound design tightens. Shots linger a fraction longer than before. The barn is not a place. It's a mechanism. A trigger. It doesn't give answers, it gives mirrors. The central reveal, that Alice split herself, quite literally, into 2 cognitive versions, is where the story folds inward. But the brilliance lies not in the twist, but in how the film earned it. Every scene before this moment suddenly reconfigures. Her hesitations, her lost time, her strange familiarity with people and places, none of it was faulty storytelling. It was calibration. Critics have lauded this moment not as a narrative surprise, but as an emotional collapse. Because what we learn is devastating. Alice wasn't just a bystander to the past, she was its architect. Her decision to create the vault version of herself, to sever conscience from action, wasn't coerced. It was chosen. And worse, she did it believing it would protect her family. Believing that survival meant sacrifice. Believing that her brother, Danny, could be collateral in a future no one would remember. This is where the film's thematic weight reveals itself in full. The intersection between morality and memory. In a time where stories often deal in absolutes, good versus evil, right versus wrong, this film swims in murky waters. It suggests that forgetting is a luxury, that systems survive because we choose to sever ourselves from consequence. Alice didn't lose her brother. She bartered him. Not in anger. In rationale. And the cost was a fracture so deep that an entire town became part of the forgetting. The vault, the other Alice, isn't a villain. She's not angry. She's exhausted. Critics have described her scenes as aching, stillborn grief in motion. She carries the weight Alice discarded, not with resentment, but with inevitability. Her existence is a ledger. Every smile Alice smiled after the split was purchased with the vault's silence. And so when the two versions meet, finally, in the barn, it's not a showdown. It's a reckoning. A reunion not of bodies, but of burden. The emotional tension in that scene doesn't come from fear. It comes from recognition. They know each other too well. And the tragedy is not that one must erase the other, but that neither knows who they are without the other. The critical response to this moment was unlike anything the filmmakers anticipated. Audience members described feeling personally implicated. Not in the literal events of the film, but in its emotional mechanics. Because who among us hasn't chosen to look away? To forget? To make peace with something we shouldn't? It is that universal intimacy with denial that gives the film its staying power. Then comes the decision. Alice activating the merge. It isn't a victory. It isn't even redemption. It's surrender. It's the choice to carry everything again. To hold the weight she once split in two. From a cinematic perspective, this moment is visually understated, a hand reaching toward a switch. But emotionally, it detonates. Every scene that follows is quieter, but heavier. Alice doesn't speak much. Her posture changes. Her eyes carry a different kind of tired. The aftermath is not spectacle. There are no protests, no climactic explosions. Just awareness. She confronts the town, not with rage, but with evidence. Danny's journal. Surveillance footage. Contracts signed in hidden offices. And the town doesn't erupt. It exhales. Slowly. Painfully. Like someone finally letting in the truth after years of shallow breathing. One critic wrote, "The revolution in this film doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives like a sunrise, a little too late, but inevitable." Thematically, that's the point. Change doesn't always come as fire. Sometimes it arrives in conversation, in the breaking of a silence, in a woman walking into a council chamber and placing her past on the table like a corpse. The choice to end the film with a walk through the field, unscored, unspoken, was divisive. Some viewers longed for catharsis. Others called it perfect. But in critical circles, that final image has become iconic. Because it refuses to resolve. The child walking beside her, real or imagined, past or future. The light breaking through the overcast sky, hope or illusion. The film offers no answers. Only questions. Only mirrors. And perhaps that's why it lingers. Because in the end, this isn't a story about memory, or guilt, or loss. It's a story about the unbearable cost of becoming whole. Alice Rourke is not a hero. She is a reckoning. The town is not redeemed. It is remembered. And we, the audience, are not asked to forgive. We are asked to choose, to forget, or to carry it forward. Not many films ask that of us. Fewer still make us feel like the answer might already be inside us. Waiting. Watching. Whispering. There's a kind of mythology that slowly grows around certain films, not because they're surrounded by controversy, or because they're splashed across tabloids, but because of how quietly they embed themselves into the people who make them. The process of crafting this particular story was one that unfolded not in the typical rhythm of modern film production, but more like an unearthing. The cast and crew didn't feel like they were building something new. They often said it felt like they were digging something up. Something already buried beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed piece by piece. The production began in early autumn, on a plot of land somewhere between what was once a town and what's now a forgotten highway offshoot. The choice of location wasn't just aesthetic, it was spiritual. The director, Lila Evers, had driven across the country 6 times in search of a place that felt untouched by irony. She didn't want slickness. She wanted fatigue. Soil that remembered too much. Trees that creaked not from wind, but from memory. When she found it, she didn't scout it with a production team. She slept in her car for 3 nights, listened to the wind, watched the fog cling to the ground in the early morning. Then, she declared it ready. The town was real. Or what remained of it. A handful of skeletal homes, a diner that had shut its doors 15 years ago, and a church that hadn't held a service in over a decade. The crew didn't build new sets, they restored the decay. Wallpaper was stripped away to reveal older wallpaper. Doors that had been nailed shut were cautiously pried open. What they found behind some of them didn't make it into the film, but quietly haunted the production. Old letters still taped to refrigerators. Children's shoes tucked under beds. At one point, a box of photographs was discovered in a crawlspace. Dozens of images, none labeled, none dated. Lila kept them in a suitcase beside her directing chair, calling them her ghost consultants. The barn, that eerie centerpiece of the story, was one of the few structures actually built from the ground up, but even then, it wasn't done traditionally. Lila hired a team of set designers who had backgrounds in dream architecture and interactive installations rather than film. Not in protest, but in silence. She said later that she felt as though someone had performed her back at herself. She hasn't watched it since. One of the more unsettling rumors from the set involves the crew staying in a series of cottages near the filming location. Each room had a locked drawer in the nightstand. No one could open them, not even with hotel keys. Midway through filming, one of the crew members managed to pry their drawer open using a kitchen knife. Inside was a single Polaroid of them sleeping. The photo wasn't recent. It was dated 4 years earlier. That same night, they left the production without a word. The barn caught fire once. It was early in the shoot, just after a night scene involving the Echo character. No one was hurt, but the fire was intense and isolated. Curiously, the interior was untouched. Only the exterior burned, peeling back to reveal a second, untouched facade beneath. No one claimed to have built the second layer. It wasn't in the blueprints. The lead carpenter reportedly quit the next day, leaving behind a note that read, "It was never hollow. We just didn't dig far enough." The ending of the film was reshot 3 times. Not because it wasn't working, but because Lila wanted to capture 3 different versions of emotional density. She used thermal imaging to measure the actors' body temperature across their skin during performance. The version selected for Final Cut was the one with the highest core-to-surface differential, what Lila called the version with the coldest face and the hottest heart. Even the weather worked against the shoot. No forecast was ever correct. Days slated for clear skies brought fog so dense the crew had to use sonar to move equipment. Scenes scheduled for sunset light were abruptly hit with downpours that never appeared on radar. Some claim the barn caused it. Others say the script was too tightly wound with grief for the Earth to ignore. In post-production, there was a moment when the footage from one key scene, Alice reading Danny's journal, began corrupting during playback. Not glitching, but shifting. Lines that weren't written began appearing in her handwriting. Lines no one remembered filming. The footage was run through 3 different verification systems. All confirmed the footage was authentic, that it hadn't been tampered with. And then, as quietly as it came, the anomaly vanished. When they checked again days later, the extra lines were gone. To this day, the film contains no original score. Every sound is environmental. Every swell of emotion is built from silence and breath, wind and wire, memory and whisper. And yet, it leaves you with the feeling that something deeper was playing underneath. A music only your subconscious could hear. A thread of sound not recorded, but remembered. Some films entertain. Others provoke. A few manage to disturb. But this one remembers you. Long after you've walked away. There's a moment near the end, not grand, not scored with rising strings or punctuated by violence. Just a stillness, a woman standing in the middle of a field, the wind barely brushing past her sleeves. She doesn't say anything. She just looks. But it's in that wordless pause where everything changes. Not for the world. Not even necessarily for the story. But for us, the ones watching. That final silence, stretched between knowledge and consequence, lingers long after the screen fades. And in that pause, the film's truth lives. From the beginning, what sets this story apart is its insistence on withholding the comfort of clarity. Most narratives offer tension and then release, mystery and then resolution. This one offers tension and then more tension, mystery followed by another layer of disorientation, and then, eventually, understanding not through revelation, but through surrender. The most significant events in the story aren't when things happen, but when they don't. It builds its emotional landscape not from external conflict, but from the quiet horror of implication. Take, for instance, Alice's return to her hometown. In most films, a protagonist's homecoming is marked by nostalgia or a forced confrontation with the past. Here, it's marked by absence. The town isn't alive with secrets, it's smothered in silence. And yet, that quietness screams. Every encounter feels watched, every smile laced with practiced deflection. Critically, this choice reframes the setting itself as an antagonist, not malevolent, but complicit. It's not trying to stop Alice. It's simply betting that she won't dig deep enough. This choice unsettled audiences and critics alike. At its premiere, some called the first act glacial, others quietly revolutionary. Because in a world used to overstimulation, this film asks for patience. For discomfort. It wants you to sit in the dark with Alice and notice what's missing, what's too clean, what's too practiced. It's a slow poison, and the first dose comes when Alice finds the photograph on her porch. From a critical standpoint, that single image is the fracture point. The film never shows who leaves it. We never hear a knock. It simply appears. In a more traditional narrative, this would cue a turning point. Here, it cues a question. Who is orchestrating the breadcrumbs? And more importantly, why do they want her to remember? This is where the film begins to tease its central conceit, that memory is not a truth but a strategy. As Alice investigates, each interaction is designed to deepen our discomfort rather than provide answers. The townspeople aren't malicious. They're weary. Their eyes flicker with recognition, then panic, then denial. A woman who used to babysit Alice now sells flowers by the church. She calls Alice Anna, then quickly corrects herself. That slip, never referenced again, hangs like fog across the rest of the film. Names become unstable. Identity unspools. The crew didn't build new sets, they restored the decay. Wallpaper was stripped away to reveal older wallpaper. Doors that had been nailed shut were cautiously pried open. What they found behind some of them didn't make it into the film, but quietly haunted the production. Old letters still taped to refrigerators. Children's shoes tucked under beds. At one point, a box of photographs was discovered in a crawlspace. Dozens of images, none labeled, none dated. Lila kept them in a suitcase beside her directing chair, calling them her ghost consultants. The barn, that eerie centerpiece of the story, was one of the few structures actually built from the ground up, but even then, it wasn't done traditionally. Lila hired a team of set designers who had backgrounds in dream architecture and interactive installations rather than film. Their goal wasn't just to construct something believable, but to build a space that felt like a memory already dissolving. The foundation was laid crooked, intentionally. Boards were hand-distressed. The walls were layered with materials that reflected sound in unpredictable ways, causing footsteps and whispers to echo differently depending on where you stood. No scene in the barn sounds exactly like another because of this acoustic instability. It was designed to be emotionally reactive. The lead actress, Mara Lynn, arrived on set weeks before principal photography began. Not for rehearsals, there weren't any, but to inhabit the space. Lila gave her a single instruction: don't act. Just exist. Mara spent her mornings journaling in the kitchen of her rented house, her afternoons walking the outskirts of the town, and her evenings recording her own voice reading excerpts from Danny's fictional journal. These recordings were later used as background texture during editing, layered so faintly into the mix that they hover just beneath consciousness. You never quite hear them. But they're there. The rest of the cast followed a similarly unusual path. Rather than formal table reads, the ensemble engaged in memory sessions. They'd gather in the barn at night, sitting in a circle surrounded by dim lamps and silence. Each actor would be given a single sentence, a piece of backstory, a half-remembered confession, and asked to say it aloud only once. No response. No repetition. Just release. These sessions weren't recorded. Lila insisted the power of them was in their disappearance. That what wasn't captured would still live in the performances. During one of these sessions, a supporting actor, who played the town librarian, spoke a line that wasn't in the script. "I saw the girl burn the barn," he said, almost in a trance. "But she was already inside it." No one responded. But the next day, the line appeared in Mara's scene notes, handwritten by Lila herself. The cinematographer, Julian Hayes, chose to shoot the entire film on modified 16mm film stock. Not for the grain or nostalgia, but because he believed film captured the parts of light that digital sensors are scared of. His camera team used vintage lenses scouted from estate sales and repurposed optical equipment from early weather satellites. There were no cranes. No dollies. Every movement was handheld, but not in the shaky, frenetic way audiences expect. The movements were slow, reverent, as though the camera were not documenting, but eavesdropping. Lighting was a puzzle of its own. Natural light was used whenever possible, but more interesting were the night shoots. Rather than flood the set with artificial sources, the crew constructed massive reflective structures, wooden skeletons stretched with translucent cloth and mirrors, that captured and redistributed candlelight or single bare bulbs. These light ghosts, as the crew nicknamed them, caused shadows to move in ways no one could quite predict. Sometimes actors found their own silhouettes facing them. One actor reportedly refused to enter the barn during these setups, claiming he saw his shadow breathing. Sound was sacred on set. There were entire shoot days where no one was allowed to speak unless they were in the scene. Sound mixers set up contact mics under floorboards and within wall cavities to capture the architecture of silence. Every creak and groan you hear in the film is genuine, none added in post. One of the strangest production moments happened during the filming of Alice's first return to the town square. The weather had been dry for weeks, but as they began shooting, a thick fog rolled in, seemingly from nowhere. It wasn't forecasted, and it didn't register on radar. But it stayed, unnaturally dense and motionless, for 6 hours. Lila refused to cut. She saw it as a sign. That entire sequence was filmed in a single take, the fog never lifting, the actors barely visible. When asked later, Lila said, "It was the town exhaling." No one used walkie-talkies. Instead, crew members communicated via old-fashioned signal lights, small bulbs of different colors placed in visible corners of each set. Green meant, "Stand by." Blue meant, "Prepare." Red meant, "Let go." It was part of Lila's vision of keeping digital interference to a minimum. She believed devices spooked the story. Food on set was vegetarian. Not for ethics, but for energy. Lila believed meat slowed the body's frequencies. No one challenged her. One night, during a break from filming, Mara wandered into the barn alone. She was found hours later, curled up under the central rig, asleep. When asked what happened, she said she had a dream of Danny reading to her. That she woke up crying and couldn't remember why. That scene, the one where Alice breaks down alone in the barn, no dialogue, just presence, was shot the next morning. It wasn't scripted. Even the editor, Theo March, worked differently. He edited the film out of sequence, beginning with the dream sequences and memory glitches. He wanted the unconscious rhythm of the story to shape the spine. The scenes with dialogue came last. "Words are lies," he said in an interview. "But pacing never is." And then there's the final frame. Alice walking through the field. No direction was given. Mara wasn't told the camera was rolling. Lila simply asked her to go where the air feels oldest. The child who joins her at the edge of the frame wasn't cast. He was the son of a lighting tech, visiting set that day. He wandered into the shot. No one stopped him. Lila watched the footage in silence. Then whispered, "There it is." No reshoots were done. And so the film ends not with orchestration, but with accident. Not with plot, but presence. For the people who made it, the film wasn't just a project. It was a process. A ritual. A way to confront the parts of themselves they had been avoiding. There were tears. There were arguments. There were long, silent dinners where no one knew how to come back to the present. But there was also a kind of quiet transformation, like something old and bruised inside each of them had finally exhaled. In the end, what was captured wasn't just a story about memory, guilt, or identity. It was memory itself. Not polished. Not explained. Just remembered. There is a road that stretches into the opening frames, one that doesn't lead anywhere we know, or at least not anywhere we remember. It is cracked in the middle, the edges grown over with weeds that rustle faintly, as if trying to whisper back the names of those who used to pass by. And it's on this road that everything begins, not with an arrival, but with a return. The land, the sky, the weight of the air itself. They all feel like they've been holding their breath for years, waiting for someone to step back into their silence. From the very first frame, the film doesn't announce itself with fanfare or noise. It breathes. It waits. And the places it brings us to are not backdrops, they are the marrow of the story. The town, unnamed throughout the film, is never presented as a character in the conventional sense. It doesn't pulse with mystery or offer secrets wrapped in spectacle. Instead, it slouches. It sags. It watches. Its houses lean with age, some windows shuttered like eyelids refusing to open. The air carries a strange stillness, not the kind you find in peaceful places, but the kind that follows a long, unspoken guilt. The production scouted real, forgotten corners of the country for this. Towns not on maps, where main streets had no traffic and nature was slowly reclaiming what humans had once insisted on shaping. But more than the authenticity of decay, it was the texture that mattered. The old paint, sun-bleached and chipped in layers. The telephone poles that leaned just a little too far, like drunks at the end of their story. The way shadows fell across buildings at certain hours, making shapes that didn't quite match the structures that cast them. Every structure we see tells a story that the dialogue never needs to explain. The school, long since emptied, still has a child's drawing taped to the inside of a broken window. The diner, its stools still lined in a perfect row, plays faint music only when no one is inside. The church bells ring not at noon or on the hour, but just before dusk, briefly, as if trying to remember something important. The cinematography leans into this atmosphere with a reverence for the forgotten. Wide shots are used sparingly, and when they arrive, they're often still. So still, in fact, that the audience isn't sure if they're looking at a moving image or a photograph. The camera doesn't rush. It doesn't pan with purpose. It lingers. It allows the frame to breathe until even silence begins to speak. Julian Hayes, the cinematographer, once said in an interview that his goal wasn't to light scenes, it was to darken them. Not through shadows, but through absence. Light in this film doesn't arrive easily. It feels earned. It slips across floors like memory. It leaks through blinds as if it had to bargain its way in. And when it floods, a rare occasion, reserved for a handful of critical moments, it feels invasive, even threatening, like truth itself pushing past years of repression. The barn, of course, is the film's centerpiece, both thematically and visually. But it's more than a location. It's a vessel. The camera treats it with quiet dread. It never shows the entire structure at once. We see pieces, corners, the lip of the roof, the slight warp in one of the doors, before we're ever invited inside. And when we do enter, it's as if the film itself exhales. The barn is not shot like a building. It is shot like a wound. Interior scenes here are captured with a combination of ultra-close lenses and extremely shallow depth of field. Objects drift in and out of focus, papers, wires, faces, giving the barn a dreamlike, almost underwater quality. It's disorienting by design. The viewer, like Alice, is never quite sure what they're meant to be looking at. The space folds in on itself, refracting familiarity through angles that don't behave. Corners vanish where they shouldn't. Walls seem closer than they are. The barn isn't big, yet inside, it feels infinite. Color, too, is weaponized. The town is washed in muted earth tones, rust, dust, overcast gray, the pale yellows of dying grass. But the barn shifts. Inside, whites are too white, shadows too deep. There are sudden intrusions of sterile blue light that don't match any visible source, evoking machinery, memory, and institutional coldness. These moments are never explained. They just exist, another layer of unreality pressing in. Then there's the field. The field surrounding the barn is the only open space in the film, and yet it's where the story feels most claustrophobic. Tall straw, dry and whispering, stretches out in all directions. There are no landmarks, no trails, just a rustling sameness that seems to shift depending on where Alice stands. The straw isn't just a crop. It's a maze. A membrane. In one scene, she steps into it during daylight, and when she emerges, it's dusk. Time bends in the straw. Logic falters. Critics have long debated the symbolism of the field. Some say it represents suppressed memory, each blade of straw a forgotten detail, too minor to hold on its own but suffocating in numbers. Others believe it's a threshold, a space between real and imagined, where Alice confronts the truth not as it happened, but as she feels it should have happened. Lila never confirmed either theory. She simply said, "It's not a field. It's the cost." Inside homes, the aesthetic turns tighter. Alice's childhood house is filmed not like a domestic space, but like a museum exhibit. Each room is composed as if someone had just stepped out a moment before, a chair still turned away from the table, a book spine creased on the nightstand. But everything is still. No movement. No breath. The air feels suspended. Cinematography in these interior spaces leans heavily on static shots and asymmetry. Alice is often framed off-center, frequently shot from behind or through mirrors. She's not granted traditional close-ups until late in the film, reinforcing the notion that she is, at first, unavailable to herself. That even the camera, like the audience, is waiting for her to remember. A particularly striking sequence occurs during her first reading of Danny's journal. She sits on the floor of her old bedroom, surrounded by dim lamplight. The camera doesn't move. The only motion in the scene is the slight trembling of her hand turning the page. The wallpaper behind her is peeling, revealing a pattern of faded blue underneath, a pattern that matches one from the barn. It's a silent connection, never addressed, but visually undeniable. The past isn't buried. It's layered. Sound design complements the visual strategy by emphasizing absence. There is almost no music. Instead, the score is environmental. The hum of a fridge. The whir of distant wind turbines. A far-off train that never appears. These sounds fade in and out like thoughts, shaping emotional responses without dictating them. In the barn, sound becomes more experimental. Recorded using contact microphones embedded into the set, the creaks and groans feel internal, as if the building is reacting to Alice's presence. At one point, when she's closest to discovering the truth, we hear a high-pitched frequency begin to rise, barely audible but piercing. It continues for several minutes before vanishing. It was never acknowledged. But audiences reported feeling uneasy, suffocated, nauseated during those moments. A sonic pressure applied directly to the subconscious. Perhaps the most powerful use of setting occurs in the film's final minutes, when Alice walks through the field for the last time. The sky is overcast, but there's a strange warmth to the light. Not hopeful, exactly, just less cruel. She isn't framed in the center. She's small in the shot, almost consumed by the field. Time bends in the straw. Logic falters. Critics have long debated the symbolism of the field. Some say it represents suppressed memory, each blade of straw a forgotten detail, too minor to hold on its own but suffocating in numbers. Others believe it's a threshold, a space between real and imagined, where Alice confronts the truth not as it happened, but as she feels it should have happened. Lila never confirmed either theory. She simply said, "It's not a field. It's the cost." Inside homes, the aesthetic turns tighter. Alice's childhood house is filmed not like a domestic space, but like a museum exhibit. Each room is composed as if someone had just stepped out a moment before, a chair still turned away from the table, a book spine creased on the nightstand. But everything is still. No movement. No breath. The air feels suspended. Cinematography in these interior spaces leans heavily on static shots and asymmetry. Alice is often framed off-center, frequently shot from behind or through mirrors. She's not granted traditional close-ups until late in the film, reinforcing the notion that she is, at first, unavailable to herself. That even the camera, like the audience, is waiting for her to remember. A particularly striking sequence occurs during her first reading of Danny's journal. She sits on the floor of her old bedroom, surrounded by dim lamplight. The camera doesn't move. The only motion in the scene is the slight trembling of her hand turning the page. The wallpaper behind her is peeling, revealing a pattern of faded blue underneath, a pattern that matches one from the barn. It's a silent connection, never addressed, but visually undeniable. The past isn't buried. It's layered. Sound design complements the visual strategy by emphasizing absence. There is almost no music. Instead, the score is environmental. The hum of a fridge. The whir of distant wind turbines. A far-off train that never appears. These sounds fade in and out like thoughts, shaping emotional responses without dictating them. In the barn, sound becomes more experimental. Recorded using contact microphones embedded into the set, The creaks and groans feel internal, as if the building is reacting to Alice's presence. At one point, when she's closest to discovering the truth, we hear a high-pitched frequency begin to rise, barely audible but piercing. It continues for several minutes before vanishing. It was never acknowledged, but audiences reported feeling uneasy, suffocated, nauseated during those moments. A sonic pressure applied directly to the subconscious. Perhaps the most powerful use of setting occurs in the film's final minutes, when Alice walks through the field for the last time. The sky is overcast, but there's a strange warmth to the light. Not hopeful, exactly, just less cruel. She isn't framed in the center. She's small in the shot, almost consumed by the field. But she walks with purpose now. No longer wandering, but choosing. And when the child appears beside her, stepping into the frame without ceremony, it isn't played as a twist or reveal. There's no musical sting. Just wind, and the faint crunch of straw beneath their feet. This scene was shot during the final hours of natural light on the last day of filming. There were no rehearsals. No call-outs. The entire crew had gone silent by then, watching from a distance. And as the two figures moved across the frame, the camera didn't follow. It just waited until they disappeared. And that's the heartbeat of the film's setting and its visual language. It doesn't lead the audience. It waits for them. It doesn't insist on being understood. It invites you to feel your way through, to recognize the echoes, to question the cracks, to listen to the quiet. Because in this world, the setting isn't a container for the story. It is the story. And once you've walked through its fields, touched its walls, listened to the sounds it doesn't want to make, you don't leave unchanged. There are some films where the set becomes another kind of memory, alive not just on screen, but in the minds of everyone who touched it. Not simply a place where scenes were staged, but a liminal pocket of time, carved out in the middle of nowhere, where reality softened around the edges and the usual rules didn't seem to apply. This was that kind of film. The kind where even off-camera moments felt like echoes of the story they were telling. Where behind the scenes wasn't a break from the narrative, but another layer of it. From the start, it wasn't a typical production. There were no trailers. No call sheets posted on public walls. The daily schedule was delivered each morning in sealed envelopes. Every department had its own envelope. No one saw the full picture. You'll know what you need to know when the moment asks for it, Lila Evers, the director, would say. That was her method, half map, half surrender. Most of the crew initially balked at the idea. But after the first week, something shifted. They stopped resisting the uncertainty. They started listening more. Not to her, but to the work, to the land, to each other. Filming began on a cold morning that hadn't been forecasted. It was supposed to be mild, the kind of dry autumn day that sits gently on the skin. But instead, mist rolled over the hills and clung to the treetops like regret. The production coordinator, Jules, joked that the weather read the script. The camera crew set up slower than usual, muffled by fog and the strange quiet that comes with it. And then, without cue or reason, Mara Lynn walked into the shot, barefoot, holding the prop journal in her hands. The fog never cleared that day. But no one minded. The footage was magic. Lila kept it all. Mara herself became a kind of gravitational center on set. Not because she tried to be. In fact, the less she spoke, the more people leaned in. She had this way of listening that made silence feel earned. She rarely stayed with the others between scenes. Instead, she'd walk the perimeter of the filming locations, often alone, often humming softly under her breath. A song no one recognized. When asked about it, she said it was something her grandmother used to sing when she didn't want to cry out loud. But despite her solitude, there was warmth. Every evening, she'd handwrite small notes, quotes, affirmations, questions, and leave them tucked in coat pockets, script margins, or beneath coffee mugs. No one ever saw her place them. But they began to surface everywhere. Notes like, "Don't trust what the door remembers," or "Even straw was once alive." No two were alike. Some crew members collected them, treating them like talismans. Others returned them to the set, hiding them again. It became its own silent game, an invisible current of connection. The bond between the crew members, too, was unlike anything most of them had experienced. Without walkie-talkies or tech chatter, communication slowed down, became more deliberate. Meals were taken communally, often in silence, at a long wooden table built from reclaimed lumber found near the old train tracks just outside town. The sound department would sometimes tap their drinking glasses in rhythm, creating ambient tones that felt like wind chimes dreaming. One of the funnier recurring moments came courtesy of the assistant props master, Theo, who believed the barn didn't like certain items. If a piece of equipment repeatedly failed inside the structure, batteries dying, lenses fogging, recordings glitching, he'd mutter, "It's rejecting the foreign body," and remove the item altogether. His superstition became so infectious that by week 3, even the hardened gaffer started referring to the barn as her. As in, she didn't like the LED panels today. And then there was the child. No one hired him. No one scouted him. He wasn't part of any plan. His name was Elias, 7 years old, the son of a lighting technician named Reed. On the days his school was closed, Reed brought him along. Elias wandered the set like a ghost in jeans and muddy sneakers. Always quiet. Always watching. He never spoke unless spoken to. And when he did, it was usually something strange and perfect, like, "I think the trees remember the old houses," or "She cries at night when no one's in the barn." No one ever corrected him. When he walked into the final shot, Mara in the field, sky bleeding light behind her, it wasn't planned. He just stepped in, looked up at her, and matched her pace. The take was long, unbroken. Neither spoke. The crew watched from a distance, frozen. After it ended, Lila turned to her cinematographer and whispered, "That's the end." And it was. But not everything went smoothly. Halfway through production, the generator system failed, completely. A blown circuit buried deep in the wiring. The nearest replacement was days away, and the chute risked shutting down. But Lila refused to stop. "We don't need power," she said. "We need presence." For the next 5 days, the crew lit everything with natural light, candles, mirrors, and battery-powered torches. Those scenes? Some of the most breathtaking in the film. The shadows moved like breath. The flickering light caught truths no artificial source could replicate. Even after the power returned, they kept using the same setup. They called it the blackout blessing. Weather, too, became a challenge that turned into serendipity. During a key scene, Alice's breakdown in the barn, a thunderstorm rolled in out of nowhere. They had already blocked the scene. Everyone was in position. But as the wind began to rise, Lila simply said, "Keep rolling." The barn groaned. The sky cracked open. Rain struck the roof like drumming fingers from another realm. Mara, soaked, didn't break. She kept going. Didn't flinch. And the rawness of it became unforgettable. That take made it into the final cut. No sound design necessary. The crew, too, wasn't immune to the emotional toll of the story. Despite the intentional distancing between their work and the narrative, there were moments when the lines blurred. On more than one occasion, a crew member asked to leave set, not out of frustration, but emotion. One grip was seen crying quietly behind a lighting rig during a scene where Alice reads Danny's journal aloud. "I thought I was fine," he said later. "And then I realized I never said goodbye to my brother." The editing process had its own set of mysteries. Theo March, the editor, insisted on working alone in a small cabin near the lake. He turned off all internet, used an analog system for logging dailies, and worked mostly at night. He would send cuts by courier to the production office every 3 days. Inside the envelope, a VHS tape. Not a USB. Not a link. Lila kept a VCR on hand for this reason. She called it watching in shadows. It kept the footage feeling sacred, she said. Unspoiled. A particularly moving behind-the-scenes moment came during the final week of filming. The crew held a silent walk through the entire set, each person taking a moment alone in the barn, then walking the perimeter of the field. No cameras. No scripts. Just presence. One by one, they moved through the spaces they had shaped, whispering goodbye not to each other, but to the story. Lila followed last. She placed a single photo, the one found in the attic scene, beneath the floorboards of the barn, wrapped in wax paper. "Some things should stay buried," she said softly. After the film wrapped, many of the cast and crew reported vivid dreams, recurring imagery of the straw field, of fog pressing against glass, of a voice calling from a distant room. None of them found it unsettling. Just echoing. And when the premiere finally came, low-key, held in a theater with no advertisements and only 100 seats, those same people sat side by side, holding hands in the dark. Not to celebrate a finished product, but to witness something they all had lived through in pieces, now stitched together into a whole. They watched not as spectators, but as survivors of something that couldn't quite be named. Because for them, the film wasn't just captured on camera. It was lived. Whispered, dreamt, and that, perhaps, is what made it unforgettable. There's a moment, quiet, nearly missed, where Alice Rourke stands alone in the field, just before dawn. The world is still sleeping, but something in the earth hums faintly beneath her feet. She bends, fingers brushing against the brittle stalks of straw, and holds one up to the pale light. It's dry, weightless, almost nothing. But she stares at it like it might confess. Like in its silent architecture, it carries the truth of everything that came before. And maybe it does. Because that's how the film speaks. In symbols that don't announce themselves. In objects so ordinary they're nearly invisible. In spaces so still they feel sacred. It doesn't shout its themes, it lets them echo. Memory, guilt, identity, silence. These are not just ideas threaded into the narrative. They are the bones of the story, the marrow inside each scene. And through its slow, atmospheric unfolding, the film offers not a lesson, but a confrontation. It asks not what you saw, but what you didn't want to. At its core, the film is an exploration of memory. Not the sentimental kind, but the unreliable, painful kind. The kind we curate, edit, and sometimes erase entirely. Alice's journey is not just through a forgotten town or a buried investigation. It's through the fragmented terrain of her own mind. The plot moves forward, but her arc spirals inward, collapsing into itself, then rebuilding from the wreckage. She comes searching for her brother, for truth, for closure. But what she finds is that she already knew everything. Not consciously, but deeper. The mind, after all, has layers. And hers had been split, not just emotionally, but surgically, methodically, purposefully. That idea, that memory can be divided, that conscience can be severed, becomes the film's most harrowing proposition. It decays at the edges. And when you're telling a story about memory, about what erodes and what lingers, that kind of texture becomes narrative. Julian chose vintage lenses, some with scratches on the glass that weren't corrected. In interviews, he said he wanted the viewer to question the frame, to feel like they weren't watching a film so much as peeking into something that wasn't meant to be seen. This idea was pushed further by how the camera moved, or didn't. Most scenes are shot in stillness. When movement comes, it's deliberate, heavy, like a breath that had been held for too long. Pans are slow. Tilts are cautious. Even handheld moments are less about chaos and more about vulnerability, as if the camera itself is unsure whether it should be there. The barn scenes were filmed with a distinct visual philosophy. The space was lit almost entirely by practical light, lamps, candles, ambient bleed from outside. But that wasn't all. The barn had layers, physical and emotional, and the lens choices reflected that. Depth of field was shallow, forcing the audience's eye toward uncertain focus. Faces drifted in and out of clarity. Objects in the background took on unsettling importance. It was never quite clear what the scene wanted you to notice. And that was the point. You weren't being guided. You were being left alone inside it. Editing, done by Theo March, was equally unconventional. He didn't begin with the script. He didn't even begin with the footage. He began with sound. Long before cutting any images together, Theo assembled what he called an emotional wave map of the story. He listened to the film, every breath, every moment of silence, every creak of floorboard and distant hum. From that, he built a rhythm. Only then did he begin cutting the visuals. The result is something uncanny. Scenes unfold with a rhythm that doesn't follow traditional storytelling arcs. There are no clean climaxes, no obvious transitions. One moment bleeds into the next, not abruptly, but organically, like a daydream folding into a memory. This is especially true in the flashbacks, which are never clearly marked. Instead, they arrive the way real memories do, triggered by sound, texture, or an object caught in the corner of the frame. And then there's the sound. Sound in this film is not accompaniment. It's presence. Composer A.O. Tund didn't compose a traditional score. In fact, there's no music in the conventional sense. What exists instead is a soundscape, a breathing, pulsing field of frequencies and found sounds layered so gently into the mix that many go unnoticed consciously. It's the wind tapping against a tin roof. It's the flutter of a moth against glass. It's the low thrum of electrical current recorded from an abandoned substation and slowed by 300%. These weren't added in post. They were gathered during production, sometimes using handheld field recorders, sometimes via contact mics placed in floorboards and beams. In the barn, the sound design becomes something else entirely. It isn't just environmental, it's reactive. As Alice approaches the vault chair, the ambient noise subtly shifts. Frequencies tighten. The space begins to feel denser, even though visually nothing has changed. One of the most brilliant tricks employed was the use of directional sound, that is, placing tiny speakers in the viewing theater itself during limited showings to emit near-inaudible frequencies at specific moments. A kind of auditory sleight of hand. Viewers would report feeling chills, unease, or sudden emotional weight without knowing why. The film wasn't just speaking to them. It was pressing against them. Even silence was sculpted. In most films, silence is just the absence of sound. But here, it's a living texture. Theo and A.O. worked together to layer faint, shifting ambient noise into these silent moments. Not enough to identify, but enough to feel. The result? Silence that isn't still. Silence that breathes back. These choices, so specific, so immersive, weren't just aesthetic flourishes. They served the deeper purpose of making the viewer complicit. You weren't just watching Alice rediscover her memories. You were experiencing the architecture of forgetting. You were moving through the haze of something almost understood. Box office performance, meanwhile, told its own strange story. The film opened with very little fanfare. No press junkets. No trailers in multiplexes. Lila refused traditional promotion. Instead, she released a handful of cryptic 60-second clips online, each one showing a static shot of the barn at different times of day. No characters. No music. Just ambient noise and the slow passing of time. The tagline was whispered, barely audible, "Some things remember you." Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the film sold out its limited screenings within hours. It opened in just 15 theaters nationwide, each chosen for their acoustics and layout. Each theater was redesigned to match the film's aesthetic: dimmed lights, straw beneath the seats, no food allowed. And instead of showing trailers before the film, audiences were greeted by a single projected sentence: "You are not here to watch. You are here to remember." Word of mouth carried it from there. It wasn't explosive. It was slow, inevitable, like something returning. People began traveling state to state just to see it in the few approved locations. Online discussions exploded not with memes or quotes, but with long poetic accounts of how the film made people feel. It became a kind of cinematic seance, one that didn't just invite viewers in, but asked them to sit in the dark with their own memories. In terms of numbers, the film was modest. But in terms of impact, it was seismic. Critics didn't always know how to describe it. Some called it an experiment in cinematic hypnosis. Others compared it to trauma therapy wrapped in visual poetry. But nearly all agreed it was doing something different. Something necessary. Because at its heart, the film is about disorientation. About what happens when you're forced to re-encounter a version of yourself you tried to abandon. And every frame, every edit, every breath of sound was crafted to pull the viewer into that emotional gravity. The camera didn't show you a world. It invited you to remember one. The edit didn't move forward. It moved inward. And the sound didn't underscore. It unearthed. It's rare to see a film that trusts its audience this deeply. Rarer still is one that understands memory not as a plot device, but as a terrain. And that's exactly what this film created. A place you didn't just see. A place you felt long after the lights came up.